At 11:23 a.m. on September 19, 1944, Private First Class Walter Kowalski crouched inside the cramped interior of his M4 Sherman tank, just outside the village of Arracourt, France. 3 German Panzer IV were closing fast, less than 800 yards and closing. His hands trembled. 2 days earlier, a shell had ripped through the turret and killed the previous loader. Walter had only just taken his place. He wasn't a combat soldier. He was a mechanic, thrown into the chaos of war. Before today, he'd only ever handled 4 training rounds. That was his entire experience. Inside the tank, chaos reigned. The gunner shouted about turret traverse, the commander barked out bearing and range, the driver was blindly reversing into the underbrush, and Walter, barely trained, completely green, was supposed to get a 75-inch shell into the breech as fast as possible. He reached for the first high-explosive round, 38 pounds of steel, brass, and TNT. His hands were slick with oil and sweat. At Fort Knox, they drilled the proper loading technique over and over. Point the nose forward, line up the brass base, slam it into the breech, step back. A good loader could do it in 4 seconds. A nervous one, 5. Walter had seen plenty of loaders working. They always faced the breech head-on. That's what the manual said to do. But Walter was left-handed, and inside the confined space of a Sherman turret, that made a difference. As he twisted to face the breech like he was taught, his elbow collided with the gunner's shoulder, who shoved him aside in frustration. The shell nearly slipped from Walter's grip. The commander's voice cracked through the intercom again. The Panzers were just 600 yards out. Heart-pounding, Walter made a choice, one no textbook had ever covered. He turned away from the breech, took the shell in his right hand, and reached back with his left. Feeling blindly for the breech opening, he guided the shell nose first into the chamber. Backwards. The mechanism snapped shut. The gunner fired before Walter could even register the shot. The recoil ejected heat, smoke, and noise into the tiny space. Walter ignored the sting on his neck from the hot gases and was already reaching for another round. Again, with his back turned, he repeated the motion, left hand guiding, right hand driving the shell home. 3 seconds, the breech slammed closed. Gun fired. Third shell, 2.5 seconds. Fourth, 2 seconds flat. His world was reduced to deafening booms and the metallic taste of cordite in the air. At last, the commander's voice cut through the din. Confirmation, 4 hits, 4 kills. In just 6 minutes, all 3 enemy tanks were destroyed, burning 400 yards away in the open field. Then silence. Walter stood frozen, still facing away from the breech, his hands blackened from gunpowder. The gunner stared. The commander climbed down from the hatch above and looked at Walter like he'd just witnessed magic or madness. No one loads a 75-man cannon backwards. It defied every rule, every regulation laid out in training manuals since 1942, but it had worked. And in that moment, Walter realized something the instructors back at Fort Knox had missed. What he had done out of desperation was more than just survival. It was innovation. That instinct, that improvisation, would go on to change how Sherman crews throughout General Patton's Third Army approached loading under fire. The Sherman tank they fought in wasn't designed for duels with German heavy armor. Its purpose, laid out all the way back in 1941, was infantry support. It was meant to break through fortified lines, be easily mass-produced and maintained in the field. Between 1942 and 1945, over 49,000 were made. They were well engineered, but not for head-on engagements with German tanks. The core issue was the gun. The M4's 75 Me cannon could penetrate about 3 inches of armor at 500 yards, enough to knock out early war Panzer III, but not enough to take out a Panzer rope from the front. And it was hopeless against Panthers and Tigers, which had thick sloped frontal armor that could shrug off a Sherman round with ease. By late 1943, German engineers had outpaced the Sherman threat. Armor had been reinforced, and every new Panzer rolling off the factory floor could withstand a hit from standard Sherman guns at conventional battle ranges. American military planners leaned on a strategy of numbers and maneuverability. 5 Shermans engaging 1 Panzer, attacking from the flanks exploit weaker side armor. It looked sensible on paper. In practice, it meant that 4 out of 5 Shermans would be blown apart just trying to get into position. Crews had a name for it, the death ratio. For every German tank destroyed in France during the summer of 1944, The Allies often lost 4 or 5 Shermans. At Villers-Bocage, a single Tiger decimated 25 tanks in just 15 minutes. During Operation Goodwood, 200 British Shermans were wiped out in a single day south of Keene. Everyone inside a tank knew the math. They saw the wrecks lining the hedgerows. They pulled survivors, if there were any, from burned-out turrets, and they watched comrades brew up as rounds struck ammo racks and turned steel coffins into infernos. The loader was always the first to die. He sat inches from the ready rack, surrounded by ammunition. A direct hit meant obliteration. Desperate for an edge, American tankers tried everything, stacking sandbags on armor, welding spare treads onto hulls, even painting their tanks to mimic command vehicles so German crews might target them first. Most of it made little difference. The truth remained, Sherman guns couldn't reliably penetrate German armor from the front. In head-to-head engagements, whoever fired first usually came out alive. That meant firing rate was everything. Standard Sherman reloading drills clocked experienced crews at 4 to 5 seconds per shell. That included retrieving the round, pivoting correctly, aligning the shell, ramming it home, and making way for the gunner to fire. German Panzer IV crews could match that tempo. Panther crews were a bit slower due to their heavier rounds, but they could strike from well beyond a Sherman's firing distance. Back home, Fort Knox instructors hammered the fundamentals endlessly. Face the breech, grip the shell with both hands, push forward in a smooth, direct line. Safe. Consistent. Efficient. Perfect, until the battlefield changed everything. What happens when the loader is left-handed? That was a question no one at Fort Knox had ever seriously asked. Yet Walter Kowalski was just one of an estimated 3,000 left-handed loaders in the U.S. Third Army, a number no one officially tracked, let alone planned for. The military taught one way to load a Sherman's main gun: face the breech, use both hands, ram the shell forward. If you were left-handed, you learned to do it with your right. That was the system, simple, uniform, and dangerously flawed. On a training range inside a stationary tank under calm skies, that method worked just fine, but in the reality of combat, it was killing men. The Sherman turret was just over 7 feet wide at its broadest point, a tight, hot steel box teeming with noise and motion. The loader stood on the gun's right, the gunner took the left, focused on the sights. The commander stood behind them both, half out of the hatch. And when the 75 Mach cannon fired, it recoiled 18 inches straight back, sending smoke, heat, and fragments into the confined interior. Every inch of space mattered. Every second counted. A right-handed loader had an advantage. His motion was smooth and coordinated, reaching for the round, pivoting toward the breech, feeding the shell with his strong arm aligned naturally with the gun's chamber. His left hand supported the weight. It was muscle memory and momentum working together, not so for a left-handed loader. He had to reverse the entire process, leading the motion with his weaker arm, his dominant arm stuck supporting the shell awkwardly from behind. When he twisted toward the breech, his elbow often smacked into the gunner, the traverse wheel, or the clutter of radio equipment mounted on the turret wall. It slowed him down, sometimes by just a second, sometimes more. But in tank combat, 1 second could mean the difference between firing or dying. In training, instructors wrote it off as acceptable variation. In combat, it spelled disaster. During the intense fighting near Arracourt in mid-September 1944, 4th Armored Division lost 18 Sherman tanks in just 48 hours. Many never got to fire a third shot. After-action reports noted multiple incidents where loaders, especially left-handed ones, struggled to seat the round or manipulate the breech in time. One particularly grim report detailed how a left-handed loader dropped a shell during a firefight. The delay was fatal. 8 seconds passed before another round was loaded. A German 75 mm shell struck the turret before the gun could fire. The loader was killed instantly. The gunner lost his legs, and the problem went deeper than just handedness. Even right-handed loaders struggled when the tank was moving. Shermans weren't stabilized. There was no modern gyroscope or auto-leveling system. If the tank was crawling through uneven terrain, the turret shook. The breech bounced unpredictably, and the loader had to adjust on the fly. Trying to jam a 38-pound shell into a bucking breech in a tank that's being shot at required not just strength, but perfect timing and control. Most loaders found a workaround. While loading, they'd hook one hand on the breech ring to steady themselves and use the other to guide the shell in, a one-handed method. It helped with balance, but added new problems. Shells were difficult to keep level with just one hand. Dropping one mid-combat led to precious seconds lost, anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds to recover. And by that time, a Panzer would have already gotten its shot off. Tank commanders saw it happen again and again. Crews scrambling to keep up, loaders fumbling, guns silent while enemies fired without pause. Oh, some officers tried to adjust. They called targets earlier, they repositioned their tanks to give loaders more time. But all of it was like trying to fix an engine by nudging the hood, because doctrine said the loading method was non-negotiable. Regulations were clear: face the breech, use both hands, Wosake ram forward. But what no one realized was that the answer had been sitting in the turret all along. It just required someone to ignore the manual completely. Walter Kowalski stumbled onto his unconventional technique through accident and pain. 2 days before his near-mythical tank battle near Arracourt, his Sherman had taken a glancing blow during an ambush near the village of Ratch. A Panzer round struck the frontal armor, angled just enough to be deflected. But the shock of impact slammed Walter into the steel turret wall. His right shoulder popped out of its socket. A medic yanked it back into place and gave Walter a grim diagnosis. He was done, unfit for duty. A loader without use of his right arm was like a pilot with no rudder. He couldn't lift the 38-pound shells properly, let alone guide them into a tight breech shell. But replacements were scarce. The division was under strength, and over the past week, 4th Armored Division had lost over 3 dozen loaders. There was no one else. Sergeant Raymond Miller, the tank's commander, looked Walter over and made a call. "Stay in the fight. We'll make it work," he said. The following morning, September 18th, the fog was thick as they pushed forward through broken terrain near Arracourt. Out of the mist appeared 3 German Panzer IV, 900 yards in closing. The gunner called for targets. Sergeant Miller yelled for action. Walter reached for the first round with his left hand. His right arm still hung limp, jelly-like at his side. He tried to follow training, face the breech grip with both hands, but a bolt of agony shot down his shoulder. He lost the angle. The shell twisted in his hand. The gunner shouted. The Panzers were already down to 800 yards. And Walter, panicked, desperate, and in pain, threw the manuals out the hatch. Instinctively, he turned his back to the breech and reached behind him with his left hand. It was a move like a man trying to find a light switch in the dark. His fingers felt the scorching steel ring of the breech. He locked on, pulled the round back, slammed it in. The gun's breech clamped shut. Without hesitation, the gunner pulled the trigger. The cannon roared. The turret filled with smoke and sound. Recoil and backblast licked Walter's uniform and skin. He smelled burning fabric and felt heat on his back. But the round had gone in, 3.5 seconds flat. He grabbed the next shell. Same maneuver, back turned, left hand guiding, left arm driving it home. 3 seconds, fire. Next one, faster. 2 seconds. Outside, the Panzers were firing back now, rounds shrieking past the Sherman as the distance closed. But inside, Walter didn't stop. 4th shell, 5th shell. His shoulders burned. His left biceps screamed. The muscles felt like they were splitting, but he kept going. The fight lasted just 4 minutes. They fired 9 rounds. 2 Panzer Hazier burned in the fields. The 3rd slipped away into the tree line, vanishing into the fog. When it was over, Walter's entire back was speckled with black powder burns. His left arm trembled, exhausted and sore. His right arm still refused to lift. His shirt was scorched. The cannon smoked. Sergeant Miller lowered himself down into the turret slowly. The gunner turned in his seat. Both stared at Walter for a long moment, silent. Then the sergeant asked one question. How fast was that? Walter didn't know. He hadn't been keeping track, but the gunner had. And what he saw left him stunned. Walter was reloading in 3 seconds, sometimes even faster. Quicker than their last loader. Quicker than anyone else in the platoon. Possibly the fastest in the entire battalion. Sergeant Miller didn't hesitate. "Whatever you're doing," he said, "keep doing it." It didn't matter that the method looked wrong. It didn't matter that it violated every line in the training manual, because it worked. Against all odds, it worked. Walter's unorthodox approach succeeded because it challenged three assumptions that the U.S. Army training manuals had never questioned: leverage, space, and natural motion. Let's start with leverage. The standard loading method required the loader to stand square to the breech, push the 38-pound round forward using both hands and fully extended arms. But any mechanic or someone who's ever tried to push a car knows that extended arms give you the worst possible leverage. It's like trying to force open a stuck door using your fingertips. When Walter turned his back to the breech, he changed the physics. Suddenly, he was no longer pushing with extended arms. He was driving with bent elbows, his torso backing the motion. The motion wasn't a reach anymore. It was a compact, powerful burst, almost like throwing a punch behind him. Instead of moving the round 24 inches forward, he only had to push it 12 inches back. He could engage his shoulder, his back muscles, and his core. The result? Faster, stronger, and more reliable loading, with far less exertion. Now, the second advantage, space. A Sherman's turret was never built for comfort. In close quarters, every inch mattered. The standard front-facing position took up nearly 2 feet of lateral space. With shoulders squared to the breech, the loader's elbows stuck out, frequently bumping into the gunner, the commander, or key equipment like the traverse wheels. But when Walter switched his stance, standing parallel to the gun, his profile narrowed drastically. Maybe 10 inches of elbow room tops. Suddenly, the gunner had breathing space. The commander could lean down without hitting anyone's helmet. The chaos inside the turret became just a little more functional. And then came the most important detail: natural movement. The manual's method assumed that right-handed loaders should lead with their right hand. Makes sense. But inside a confined tank, it forced them to reach across their body, to twist their torso left while trying to lead with their right arm. That motion didn't come easy. It had to be learned, rehearsed, repeated, but under fire, when adrenaline surged and fine motor skills degraded, that awkward twist often broke down. Loaders fumbled, shells slipped, seconds evaporated. Left-handed loaders had it even worse. They were instructed to pretend they were right-handed. Their stronger hand was forced to take a supporting role. In combat, that wasn't just inefficient, it was dangerous. Walter's inverted technique removed all that friction. He reached backward with his natural lead hand, his dominant left. There was no twisting, no disconnect between will and action. It was an instinctive motion. When his brain was screaming under pressure, muscle memory took over. His hand didn't need to see the breech. It knew where it was. Even more surprising, this method worked not just for lefties. Right-handed loaders could turn their backs to the breech and use their dominant hand as well, guiding rounds home with speed and strength. The rules of orientation inside the turret had just changed. But unofficially, there was one major problem. Walter's method broke every rule in the book. According to the Field Manual, Technical Manual 9731, loaders were required to face the breech at all times, maintain visual contact with the shell, use both hands, and coordinated action step clear of the gun's recoil path. During firing, Walter's method broke all four in real time under live fire. And those rules weren't arbitrary. They'd been written with blood. In North Africa, there were at least 3 documented cases of breech failures caused by poorly aligned shells. In one case, the gun misfired. The resulting blast obliterated the turret, killing the entire crew. Misalignment was no joke, and the manual forbid anything that made it more likely. Sergeant Miller knew the risks. He understood the consequences if command found out, but he also knew something else. Walter was alive, and so was the crew. After that September 18th encounter, the same one this story began with, Miller made his call. He didn't report the breach of protocol. He didn't order Walter back to regulation. He told no one. The following day, September 19th, Walter's method helped knock out 4 Panzers in under 6 minutes. No one missed the significance. In a battalion where Shermans were being lost 2-1, a crew that could win a frontal tank duel was like a miracle. People noticed. By September 20th, other loaders were experimenting with Walter's technique, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with hesitation, but trying it all the same. Within 24 hours, 3 crews were doing it, then 8. No one asked permission. No one put it on paper. They learned in whispers, practiced behind maintenance trucks, or copied the movement inside shell casings under canvas tents. No drills, No training circulars, just loaders showing loaders a trick that could help them live one more day. Then someone with rank did notice. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. 30 years old, aggressive, already a legend in armored tactics, and commander of the 37th Tank Battalion. Abrams had led the armored push that broke the lines at Bastogne. Later, he would become the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army and the man for whom the Moan Abrams would be named. But in September 1944, he was a frontline leader trying to keep his men alive. On September 23rd, while observing a live fire drill, Abrams noticed one of his crews doing something strange. The loader had his back to the breech. Abrams froze the entire exercise on the spot. He ordered the tank crew out. Then he pointed at the loader and asked, "What exactly did I just watch you do?" Sergeant Miller took a step forward. He explained everything to Lieutenant Colonel Abrams, the desperate moment in combat, Walter's injury, the unorthodox technique, the rapid firing, and the sudden shift in survivability for their crew. He laid it all out. With brutal honesty, Abrams stood silent, listening intently. His face betrayed nothing. Then he asked a single question. Does it work better than the manual?" "Yes, sir," Miller replied. "It 2 seconds faster per round on average. More reliable under pressure. Fewer errors. Better spacing inside the turret." That was all Abrams needed to hear. He didn't say a word for half a minute. Around him, every loader from the training range looked on, waiting to see if Miller and Walter would be disciplined for going against protocol. Then came a decision that changed armored warfare. Abrams gave a new order. Every single loader in the 37th Tank Battalion would learn Walter's method immediately. He didn't care what the field manual said. He cared about results. He cared about survival. And if turning your back to a 75 EM cannon gave his men even a slight edge, that was now the new standard. Within 48 hours, Abrams had the entire battalion training replacement crews on the reverse load. Walter wasn't punished. He was promoted to instructor. Abrams called him in to demonstrate the method, step by step, over and over until even veteran loaders could hit that 3-second mark with consistency. There were no official documents, no memos, just hands-on instruction and whispered acknowledgments. This is how you stay alive. By October 1st, 9 out of 10 loaders in the battalion were using the backward technique in combat, and the results spoke for themselves. Average combat engagement time dropped by a third, from 12 minutes to under 8. Kill ratios rose. Shermans were hitting and surviving at higher rates. The 37th wasn't just following orders anymore. They were rewriting battlefield norms. Other commanders in 4th Armored Division took notice. Abrams was winning fights. His crews were coming back. They started calling him. Some embraced the new way without question. Others hesitated. Military doctrine doesn't change easily. Field procedures were sanctioned by high command, and altering them without authorization could cost a commander his rank or his career. But General George S. Patton commanded 3rd Army, and Patton only cared about 2 things: speed and results. When he was shown the after-action reports coming out of 4th Armored, he asked just one thing: why isn't every loader doing this? On October 7th, 1944, Patton paid a visit to the division himself. He watched Walter demonstrate the backward technique firsthand. Then he watched 3 more loaders replicate it, each under 3 seconds. 2.88 seconds, 2.93 seconds, 2.94 seconds. Patton turned to his chief of staff and issued a direct order. Starting now, every tank battalion in 3rd Army will adopt this method. Any commander who refuses will be relieved. Any officer who courts-martials a loader for using it will answer to me. It was official. Standard operating procedure across 3rd Army had just changed. 3rd Army had 11 armored divisions, over 4,000 Sherman tanks. And in just 2 weeks, the technique Walter Kowalski discovered under fire had become the training baseline. No more whispered advice behind maintenance trucks, no more secrecy. Now, trainers walk tank crews through the motion directly. Seasoned loaders taught it to the new guys the minute they arrived. The impact was undeniable. From October to December 1944, 3rd Army's kill ratio improved dramatically. What had previously been a 3.2 to 1 loss rate flipped to 1.4 to 1. Shermans were now outgunning German armor. After that, crew survival rates jumped 18%. The reverse loading method wasn't the only change, but few doubted it was a major factor. Word spread. Other units noticed. First Army, Ninth Army. By January 1945, crews across Europe were turning their backs to the breech. By March, tankers in the Pacific Theater fighting in Okinawa were doing the same. Oddly, the official technical manual never changed. Even by war's end, TM 9731 still commanded loaders to face the breech, use two hands, and follow standard procedure. But on the ground, nobody cared. Commanders respected the manual. Crews respected survival. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, tens of thousands of Sherman loaders were using Walter's method. The Army never counted how many lives it saved. But the statistics told the story. And Walter Kowalski, he didn't get a medal. No citation, no press release, no official commendation. The Army doesn't give awards for violating the rulebook, even when those violations save lives. But Sergeant Miller made sure Walter got something. He filed a field promotion. On October 15, 1944, Walter Kowalski was promoted to corporal. He served out the rest of the war in the 37th Tank Battalion. He fought in 14 more engagements. His tank was hit 3 separate times. He walked away from all of them. Between September 1944 and May 1945, his crew destroyed 23 German tanks. Walter loaded every shell using the reverse method every single time. By war's end, he could load a 75-in round in 2.3 seconds, even blindfolded. His left hand knew the steel, the grip, the exact force needed. He didn't have to think. He just did it. After the war, Walter went home to Detroit. He returned to his old job at the Ford River Rouge plant. Married in 1947, 3 kids, spent over 40 years on the factory line before retiring in 1986. He rarely spoke about his time in France. Most men didn't. But the method he created, out of desperation in a burning turret outside Arracourt, lived on long after the shooting stopped. In Korea, U.S. forces used modified Shermans against North Korean T-34s. Their loaders were trained using Walter's method right at Fort Knox. During the fighting around the Pusan perimeter, reports from the 1st Marine Division made it clear. Loader speed was the decisive factor in many tank duels. American crews averaged 2.8-second loads. North Koreans? Nearly 4. In Vietnam, aging Sherman saw service one last time, this time with South Vietnamese crews. Even then, the method lingered. By then, the Shermans were obsolete, but the reverse technique had already evolved. Crews operating the newer M48 Patton tanks adapted the motion for their 9mm guns. The hands had changed. The steel had changed, but the legacy of a backward reach in a cramped turret remained the same. Turn your back, find the breech, drive the shell home. The principle was simple. The physics didn't care if the round was bigger or the war had changed. Whether it was a 75 Mayfeet sail in France or a 9mm round in Vietnam, the body moved the same way. Even after the rise of automatic loading systems in the 1970s, Walter's method, developed by necessity, remained relevant. The modern Moan Abrams tank uses a semi-automatic loader, but it still requires a human to handle and position each round before the mechanism takes over. The technique lived on in adapted forms. At Fort Benning, instructors continued teaching a modified version of the backward method well into the late 1980s. Veterans of Korea and Vietnam, men who had seen the method work firsthand, passed it to a new generation. Then, in 1993, a military historian researching armored warfare came across a series of after-action reports from the 4th Armored Division. The reports mentioned dramatically improved loading times, but they never explain why. Curious, the historian began digging and found Walter. He was living quietly in Michigan. When asked about what he'd done in the war, Walter shrugged. Said it wasn't anything special. Just something he figured out when his shoulder was busted, when doing it the right way wasn't an option. The historian thought differently. He wrote a paper calling Walter's backward loading technique one of the most significant frontline innovations of the Second World War. Using available data, he estimated that the method may have saved between 300 and 500 American tank crew lives in Europe alone between fall 1944 and May 1945. That number didn't even touch Korea, or Vietnam, or the decades of training that followed. Walter Kowalski passed away in 2004 at the age of 82. He was buried at Resurrection Cemetery in Clinton Township, Michigan. His obituary mentioned his service in the war, his job at the Ford plant, and the family he built afterward. It did not say that he had quietly changed the way America fought its battles, but others remembered. 7 men who had never met Walter showed up to his funeral. All veterans, all former tank loaders. They'd learned the technique from those who had learned it from Walter's crew, passed down in dugouts, maintenance yards, and training ranges. They came to honor the man who helped keep them alive without ever knowing their names. Walter's method remained standard for loaders throughout the post-war years until true automatic loading systems replaced human loaders entirely. But before that happened, it found new life. Crews operating older M48 and M60 Patton tanks continued using modified versions of the reverse load through the Cold War years. Even early Moan Abrams units, before full automation, were taught a variation of it. The method didn't die. It evolved. Today you can pull Walter's military record from the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. It lists his name, rank, unit, and dates of service. There's no mention of the technique, no mention of the lives it helped save. Just the basics, like so many soldiers who came back and got on with life. But if you dig deeper, if you request the after-action reports from September to October 1944, you'll see hints. Improved loading times, increased crew coordination, fewer casualties under fire, no explanation, just the results. At the Patton Museum in Fort Knox, Kentucky, you'll find a restored M4 Sherman tank, authentic down to the worn leather seats and steel breech. You can step into the loader's cramped space on the right side of the turret. And standing there, bent under the gun, elbow pressed to cold steel, you'll understand exactly why Walter turned his back. There was no room to do it any other way. The placard beside the Sherman lists stats, the gun size, turret armor, engine specs. It makes passing mention of innovative tactics used by U.S. crews to overcome the Sherman's disadvantages, but it doesn't mention Walter. It doesn't say anything about the scared 20-year-old mechanic who changed tank warfare with one desperate choice. That's how wars are really won. Not just through strategy, not just through superior machines, but through countless moments like Walter's, moments when fear meets instinct and someone finds a better way in the middle of chaos. Wars are won by the people who adapt, by the ones who break the rules. When the rules don't work. Walter Kowalski never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a left-handed kid from Detroit, a mechanic thrown into a tank with no training and a damaged arm, and he did what he had to do. That decision saved his life, and quietly helped save hundreds more. If you found this story as powerful as we did, please consider giving this video a like. It helps us bring more forgotten stories from World War II to light. Subscribe to follow along as we uncover the untold, the overlooked, and the extraordinary. These stories matter, and they deserve to be remembered. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Our community here stretches from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to lifelong history buffs. You're part of something special. Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for helping us keep these stories alive.